The cameras were live. Lucille Ball turned to Johnny Carson and said, "I need to tell you the truth, Johnny, because I don't have time left to say it." Studio One at NBC Burbank. February 1989. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Another Tuesday night. Another packed audience. The familiar rhythm that had defined American late-night television for 27 years. Johnny's monologue, the guests, the laughter, Ed McMahon's dependable presence, Doc Severinsen's orchestra providing the soundtrack. Tonight's guest was Lucille Ball. Hollywood royalty. Television pioneer. America's beloved Lucy. She'd been on Johnny's show dozens of times over the years. Always funny, always sharp, always the consummate professional who knew exactly how to work a talk show. But tonight felt different. Johnny had noticed it the moment Lucy walked onto the stage. The usual spark in her eyes seemed dimmed. Her famous smile appeared, but it took effort. She was 77 years old, still elegant in a blue suit that matched her eyes, her signature red hair perfectly styled. But something was off. They'd started with the usual banter. Johnny asked about her latest project. Lucy delivered her responses with that familiar comic timing. The audience laughed in all the right places. Everything seemed normal. Until it wasn't. Johnny was in the middle of asking his third question, something about her early days in Hollywood, when Lucy's expression changed. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. She took a breath. When she looked back up at Johnny, her eyes had filled with tears. "Johnny," she interrupted gently, her voice steady but softer than usual. "Can I say something? Something I need to say?" Johnny stopped immediately. His host instincts kicked in. When a guest needs space, you give it. "Of course, Lucy. Whatever you need." Lucy turned slightly in her chair to face him more directly. The studio audience, sensing the shift in energy, went completely silent. "I need to tell you the truth, Johnny," she said, her voice carrying through the studio with that clarity that had made her famous. "Because I don't have time left to say it." Cameras were live when Lucille Ball turned to Johnny Carson and said she needed to tell him the truth because she didn't have time left. And nothing was the same after that. Johnny's face changed. The easy smile disappeared. His hand, which had been holding a blue cue card, slowly lowered to the desk. The card didn't matter anymore. "Lucy," he said quietly, concern flooding his voice. "What do you mean?" She smiled sadly. "My doctors told me 3 weeks ago. My heart. They gave me maybe 6 months, probably less. I haven't told anyone outside my family. But sitting here tonight, looking at you, I realized I can't leave without saying something I should have said 20 years ago." The control room erupted into chaos. Director Bobby Quinn was screaming into his headset. "Do we cut? Do we go to commercial? What's happening?" Producer Peter Lost Sally stood behind Bobby, his hand on the director's shoulder. "Keep rolling," Peter said firmly. "Whatever she needs to say, let her say it." On stage, Johnny Carson. The king of late-night television, the man who had interviewed presidents and movie stars and maintained perfect composure through 30 years of live television, looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Ed McMahon, sitting at his desk beside Johnny, had tears streaming down his face. Doc Severinsen's trumpet hung forgotten in his hands. "Lucy, Johnny started, but his voice cracked. "Let me say this," Lucy interrupted gently. "Please, before I lose my nerve." Johnny nodded, unable to speak. Lucy took another breath and began talking. Not to the cameras. Not to the audience. Just to Johnny, as if they were the only two people in the room. "In 1962, I was at the lowest point of my life. My marriage to Desi had just ended. I Love Lucy was over. I was 41 years old, convinced my career was finished, convinced I'd lost everything that mattered. I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I was seriously considering. Well, let's just say I was in a very dark place. The studio was absolutely silent. 300 people holding their breath. One night, About 2 in the morning, I was sitting in my hotel room, and the phone rang. It was you, Johnny. You were hosting the Tonight Show from New York back then. You'd heard from someone that I wasn't doing well, and you called me. Do you remember that? Johnny's eyes were glistening. He shook his head slowly. Lucy, I don't. You probably made 100 calls like that over the years. Lucy continued, her voice thick with emotion. But that night you talked to me for 2 hours. You didn't try to cheer me up with jokes. You didn't tell me everything would be fine. You just listened. And then you told me something I've never forgotten. You said, Lucy, you changed television. You changed how women could be funny, how they could be powerful. Millions of little girls grew up watching you and believed they could be anything. You can't leave yet. There's still more work to do. Johnny Carson stopped mid-breath. The entire studio froze. Tears were running down Johnny's face now. He made no attempt to hide them. You saved my life that night, Johnny. Lucy said simply. I never told you that. I never thanked you properly. I went on to do the Lucy show, and here's Lucy, and all those years of work. I raised my children. I lived a good life. And it's because you made a phone call at 2 in the morning to someone you barely knew, just because you heard she needed help. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, folded and worn from years of being carried. I wrote down what you said that night. I've carried it with me ever since. Every time I doubted myself, every time I wanted to quit, I'd read this and remember that someone believed I still had something to give. Lucy held up the paper, showing it to Johnny, to the cameras, to America. Johnny stood up from his desk, something he rarely did during interviews. He walked around to Lucy's chair, and without a word, he took both of her hands in his. Lucy, he said, his voice breaking, I didn't save you. You saved yourself. You're the strongest person I've ever known. We saved each other, Lucy said softly. That's what I wanted to tell you. That's what I needed America to know. Behind all the laughter, behind all the shows and the fame, there are real people. And sometimes, one phone call at 2 in the morning can change everything. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The audience began to applaud. Not the thunderous applause of entertainment, but something quieter, more reverent. People were standing, tears streaming down faces, witnessing something profound. Johnny helped Lucy to her feet. They embraced. Not the polite television hug, but the real embrace of two people who had been through decades of life together, who had seen each other at their worst and their best, who understood what it cost to be human in front of millions. When they finally pulled apart, Johnny gestured to the cameras. We're going to take a break, he said, his voice rough with emotion. But we'll be right back. The moment they cut to commercial, chaos erupted backstage. Peter Lost Sally rushed onto the stage. Lucy, are you okay? Do you need anything? Lucy waved him off gently. I'm fine, Peter. I just needed to say that. Johnny needed to hear it. Johnny was still holding the folded paper Lucy had given him. He opened it carefully. In faded ink, written in Lucy's distinctive handwriting, were the words he'd apparently said 27 years ago. You changed television. You changed how women could be funny, how they could be powerful. Millions of little girls grew up watching you and believed they could be anything. You can't leave yet. There's still more work to do. Below it, Lucy had added in newer ink. He was right. Thank you, Johnny. For everything. Lucy. Backstage, Johnny made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. When they came back from commercial, Johnny didn't return to his desk. He brought out a second chair and sat beside Lucy, facing the cameras together. Folks, Johnny said, his voice steadier now but still emotional. What you just saw was real. Lucy has given me permission to tell you that she's not well. Her doctors have given her some difficult news. And she wanted to spend her time tonight not promoting a project or telling funny stories, but saying something important about kindness. Lucy nodded, taking his hand. We live in a world that can be very cruel, very isolating, especially in this business. But every now and then, someone reaches out in the dark and reminds you that you're not alone. Johnny did that for me. And I wanted everyone watching to know that small acts of kindness, a phone call, a kind word, just listening, they can change everything. Do you have that piece of paper with you? Johnny asked gently. Lucy handed it to him. Johnny held it up to the camera. I'm going to keep this, he said. And I'm going to remember that apparently, 27 years ago, I said something that mattered. We don't always know when our words are going to have an impact. We don't always know when we're changing someone's life. But we should act as if every conversation matters. Because sometimes it does. The cameras captured everything. Johnny and Lucy sitting together, holding hands, talking about loneliness and connection and the power of showing up for each other. Doc Severinsen played softly in the background, not comedy music, but something gentle and supportive. Ed McMahon didn't say a word, just sat at his desk crying openly. The segment ran 23 minutes. No commercial breaks. No comedy bits. Just two television legends having a conversation about what it means to save each other's lives. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. As the show was winding down, as Johnny was preparing to thank Lucy and close out the episode, she leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Johnny's eyes widened. He turned to look at her, and she nodded. Lucy just told me something, Johnny said to the cameras. And she's given me permission to share it with all of you. Lucy took a breath. My doctors told me 6 months. But honestly, I think it's less. I can feel it. Which is why I wanted to be here tonight. Because this show, The Tonight Show, Johnny's show, it's been a constant in American life for almost 30 years. It's been there through good times and terrible times. It's been comfort and laughter, and sometimes, like tonight, it's been truth. She looked directly at Johnny. And you, Johnny Carson, you've been the most consistent voice of kindness in television. You've used your platform not just to entertain, but to remind people that we're all human. That we all struggle. That we all need each other. Johnny was crying again, not even trying to hide it. So I wanted to come here tonight, Lucy continued, and say thank you. Not just to you, Johnny, but to everyone who works on this show. To Doc and the band. To Ed. To all the crew who make magic happen every night. And to America, for letting me into your homes for all these years. She stood up slowly, and Johnny stood with her. The audience rose as one. And I wanted to say, Lucy's voice was strong now, clear, that if you're watching this and you're in a dark place, please remember, reach out. Call someone. Tell them you're not okay. Because somewhere out there is a Johnny Carson who will answer the phone at 2 in the morning and remind you that you matter. The applause was deafening. Not just applause, people were crying, shouting, standing and cheering. The cameras panned across the audience, catching face after face streaked with tears, people holding each other. Johnny pulled Lucy into one more embrace. When they separated, he looked at the camera one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice thick with emotion, Lucille Ball. An American treasure. A pioneer. A friend. And one of the bravest people I've ever known. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Lucille Ball died 7 weeks later. April 26, 1989. The phone call came to Johnny's office while he was preparing for that night's show. He canceled the taping. For the first time in 30 years, The Tonight Show didn't air. At Lucy's memorial service, Johnny gave a eulogy. He held up that folded piece of paper, the one with his words from 1962 and Lucy's thank you note. He told the story of the 2 a.m. phone call. He explained how Lucy had taught him that sometimes, saving someone's life is as simple as being there when they need you. After he retired in 1992, Johnny Carson kept that piece of paper in a frame on his desk at home. When interviewers would ask him about his greatest moment in television, He never mentioned the famous guests or the historic interviews. He always mentioned that night with Lucy. The night when television stopped being entertainment and became testimony. The footage of Lucy's final appearance on The Tonight Show became one of the most replayed moments in television history. Not because it was funny or dramatic in the traditional sense, but because it was real. Because it showed two legends being vulnerable. Because it reminded America that behind every smile is a human being who sometimes needs help. Johnny Carson learned something that night that he would carry for the rest of his life. Your legacy isn't built in the big moments. It's built in the 2 a.m. phone calls. The quiet acts of kindness. The times you show up for someone when no one else is watching. The folded paper stayed in Johnny's home office until he died in 2005. In his will, he requested it be donated to the Smithsonian alongside his desk nameplate. Today, they sit together in the museum. A reminder that television's greatest moments aren't always the funniest ones. They're the real ones. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 7 weeks after that interview, Lucille Ball died peacefully at home, surrounded by her children. Johnny canceled that night's show. The first time in 30 years. At her memorial, he held up that piece of paper and told the story again. He explained that Lucy had taught him the real purpose of television, not to entertain, but to remind people they're not alone. The footage of Lucy's final appearance became the most replayed moment in Tonight Show history. Not for its comedy, but for its truth. Two legends being vulnerable. Two friends saving each other one more time. Johnny kept that paper on his desk until he died. His final lesson to the world: your legacy isn't built in big moments. It's built in 2 a.m. phone calls when someone needs you.